My name is Margaret Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never expected to find myself standing in a courtroom facing Judge Rosalie Bennett, a woman who had once been my daughter-in-law's maid of honor. The stunned look on her face as she recognized me was matched only by the whispers that rippled through the gallery. "Mrs. Wilson? Why are you here?" she asked, her gavel suspended midair. Behind me, I could feel my son Robert's betrayed stare burning into my back, while my former daughter-in-law, Stephanie, sat smugly beside her high-priced attorney. The family estate I'd protected for 40 years was at stake. I still remember the chill that ran down my spine that day in the courtroom. If you've ever had to fight for what rightfully belongs to your family, you know that feeling. I'd love to hear where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to stand up to protect what matters most. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about family justice, and give this video a like if you believe in standing your ground when it matters. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of how this all started. The Wilson name has meant something in Oak Ridge for over 150 years. My husband's great-great-grandfather founded this town back in 1870, establishing not just a community but a legacy that was meant to endure. Willow Creek, our family estate, sits on 40 acres of the most beautiful land in New England, with gardens that bloom magnificently in spring and a creek that winds through property that has stayed in the family for 5 generations. I wasn't born a Wilson. I was Margaret Callahan, daughter of a local doctor, when I met James Wilson at a community fundraiser in 1970. He was studying law at Harvard, tall and serious with kind eyes that lit up when he talked about justice. We married in 1972, a simple ceremony right on the grounds of Willow Creek. James went on to become one of the most respected federal judges in Massachusetts, known for his fairness and integrity. I spent those years preserving our home, managing the estate, and raising our only son, Robert. From the day Robert was born in 1980, James and I taught him about responsibility to family legacy. The Wilsons weren't just wealthy landowners, they were stewards of history. The library at Willow Creek contains first editions dating back to the 1800s. The grounds include trees planted by every generation. It wasn't just property, it was a living museum of family commitment. When Robert brought Stephanie Mitchell home from law school 15 years ago, I had my reservations. She was beautiful, certainly, with her perfect blonde hair and designer clothes that seemed a bit too expensive for a law student. She charmed James immediately with her knowledge of legal precedents and ambitious career plans. I noticed other things, how her eyes calculated the value of everything in our home, how quickly she asked about the family trust, how she spoke of Willow Creek as an asset rather than a home. But I wanted Robert to be happy. And for many years, they seemed to be. They had 2 beautiful children, Abigail, now 14, with her grandfather's serious eyes and love of books, and Thomas, 12, who could spend hours exploring the creek just like his father had. I tried to be the supportive mother-in-law, helping with the children, staying out of their marriage. I kept my concerns to myself, even when I noticed Stephanie's spending habits spiraling out of control, or when she began pushing Robert to liquidate some assets from the trust. James passed away 3 years ago after a brief battle with pancreatic cancer. The last weeks were painful but precious. One night, as I sat beside his hospital bed, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Protect Willow Creek, Maggie. It belongs to the generations, not just to us." I promised him I would. I never imagined how soon that promise would be tested. The changes in Robert and Stephanie's marriage became obvious after James died. Robert threw himself into managing his father's affairs, while Stephanie grew increasingly frustrated with what she called this mausoleum of a house. She wanted to sell some of the land for development, to renovate the historic main house into something more contemporary. When Robert refused, citing the terms of the family trust that James had established, the arguments began. 18 months ago, Robert came to me shell-shocked. Stephanie had filed for divorce, claiming emotional abandonment and irreconcilable differences regarding family finances. What neither of us knew then was that she had been planning this move for over a year, systematically gathering financial information, documenting every asset, and most importantly, cultivating her relationship with her old sorority sister who had recently been appointed to the family court bench, Judge Rosalie Bennett. The divorce proceedings quickly turned into something more than a separation. They became a calculated attack on the Wilson family legacy, with Willow Creek as the primary target. And I, as trustee after James's death, suddenly found myself in the crosshairs of a battle I never wanted to fight. I'll never forget the day Robert showed me the divorce papers. We were sitting in the sunroom of Willow Creek, the same room where we had celebrated so many family milestones. His hands trembled as he passed me the thick envelope. "She wants half of everything, Mom," he said, his voice hollow. "Half of my retirement accounts, half of our investments, and she's claiming Willow Creek should be considered marital property despite the trust." At first, Robert wanted to give Stephanie whatever she asked for, just to end things amicably. He was devastated by what he saw as his personal failure, the end of his marriage, and the broken home his children would now grow up in. But I knew this wasn't about fair division of marital assets. This was about Stephanie seeing an opportunity to claim what had never been hers. As trustee of the Wilson Family Trust, I had legal responsibilities that went beyond my role as Robert's mother. James had structured the trust meticulously, ensuring Willow Creek would pass intact through generations. The main house, the grounds, the historic collections, all were protected in a legal framework designed to withstand exactly this type of challenge. Stephanie didn't waste any time in showing her true colors. She hired Eleanor Maxwell, a divorce attorney nicknamed the Piranha for her aggressive tactics and willingness to drag proceedings out for years if it benefited her clients. Robert, still hoping for some semblance of civility, retained Brandon Harris, a competent attorney but one who specialized in amicable divorces and fair settlements. The first settlement conference was a disaster. Eleanor presented a list of demands that went far beyond anything reasonable. Full custody of the children, maximum alimony and child support, half of all financial assets, and most shockingly, a claim that Willow Creek should be sold and the proceeds divided. When Brandon pointed out the property was held in trust and not subject to division, Eleanor smirked and said, "We'll see about that." What followed was months of increasingly hostile legal maneuvers. Stephanie began restricting Robert's time with the children, claiming he was too emotionally unstable after the separation. She removed family heirlooms from Willow Creek, claiming they were gifts to her. Every attempt at reasonable negotiation was met with new demands and threats to take this all the way to court. I tried to remain neutral for the sake of my grandchildren. When Abigail and Thomas visited Willow Creek on the weekends Robert had them, I never spoke ill of their mother. I watched my son lose weight, lose sleep, and nearly lose hope as the legal battle drained not just his finances but his spirit. The first real indication of what we were truly up against came 6 months into the proceedings. Eleanor filed a motion claiming the Wilson Family Trust was invalid, alleging James had established it to fraudulently shield assets from potential creditors. It was absurd. My husband had been a federal judge with an impeccable reputation, and the trust had been established decades before Robert even met Stephanie. But the judge assigned to the case, Rosalie Bennett, allowed the motion to proceed instead of dismissing it outright. I began attending the court hearings with Robert, sitting silently in the gallery. That's when I noticed the subtle interactions between Judge Bennett and Stephanie. A slight nod here, a knowing glance there. Nothing obvious enough to raise immediate concerns, but enough to make me uncomfortable. After one particularly biased ruling on temporary support payments, I overheard a conversation in the courthouse bathroom that chilled me to the core. "Don't worry about the trust issue," Stephanie was saying to her attorney. "Rosie and I have discussed it. She understands what's at stake." "Be careful," Eleanor responded. "If anyone found out about your inside advantage." "No one will," Stephanie said confidently. "Robert and his mother still have no idea." I left the bathroom without making a sound, my heart pounding. Now I understood why every ruling had gone against Robert, why procedural questions were always decided in Stephanie's favor, why our valid legal arguments were being systematically dismissed. The judge was corrupt, and my daughter-in-law was the beneficiary of that corruption. That night, I sat alone in James' study, surrounded by his law books and the family photographs that chronicled our life together. I knew what I had to do, though the path ahead would be difficult and would likely tear what remained of our family apart. James had always said that integrity was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Now I would have to live by those words. The next morning, I began my investigation with the methodical precision I'd learned from 45 years of marriage to a judge. First, I needed to document the connection between Stephanie and Judge Bennett beyond just being sorority sisters. I spent a day in the attic, digging through photo albums until I found what I needed. pictures from Robert and Stephanie's wedding 15 years ago, clearly showing Rosalie Bennett as the maid of honor, her arm around Stephanie, champagne glass raised in toast. But personal friendship, while a clear conflict of interest, wasn't enough to prove judicial misconduct of the magnitude I suspected. I needed professional help from someone who understood the legal system but wasn't directly involved in the case. I called Michael Preston, who had clerked for James for 5 years and was now a partner at a prestigious Boston law firm. "Mrs. Wilson," Michael said when I explained my suspicions, "these are serious allegations. If you're right, it's not just unethical, it's criminal. But you need substantial evidence before making any moves." "I know," I replied. "That's why I need your help." Michael agreed to meet me at a coffee shop far from Oak Ridge, where neither Stephanie nor her attorney would recognize us. I brought the wedding photos and notes I'd made about the suspicious rulings in the case so far. As Michael reviewed them, his expression grew increasingly troubled. "The rulings themselves wouldn't be enough," he said finally. "Judges have broad discretion, and challenging them requires evidence of clear bias or misconduct. But if there's financial impropriety involved..." Together, we developed a plan. Michael would use his firm's resources to investigate Judge Bennett's financial records, property purchases, bank accounts, unusual transactions. Meanwhile, I would focus on documenting continued contact between Stephanie and the judge outside of court. It didn't take long to find evidence. Abigail had left her iPad at Willow Creek during a weekend visit, and while I would normally never invade my grandchild's privacy, I felt justified in checking her text messages with her mother. There, in black and white, was a conversation where Stephanie told Abigail to remember to say hi to Aunt Rosie at the club on Saturday. The messages continued, mentioning how Aunt Rosie says she's going to help Mommy get the big house. When I showed Robert these messages, he initially refused to believe the implications. "Mom, this doesn't prove anything," he argued. "Rosie is an old family friend. Of course she knows the kids." "A family friend who should have recused herself from our case immediately," I countered. "Robert, every single ruling has gone in Stephanie's favor. Don't you find that strange?" Brandon Harris, Robert's attorney, was even less helpful. When Robert mentioned our concerns, Brandon advised strongly against raising accusations of judicial misconduct. "You'll destroy any goodwill we've built in these proceedings," he warned, "and if you're wrong, Judge Bennett could sanction you for making false allegations." But Michael's investigation was turning up troubling evidence. Judge Bennett had recently purchased a vacation home in Nantucket for $1.2 million, a property well beyond what her judicial salary could reasonably afford. More suspiciously, the purchase coincided with a series of cash withdrawals from Stephanie's personal account. The final piece fell into place when Judge Bennett issued a preliminary ruling that the Wilson Family Trust should be opened for discovery of potential fraud, potentially exposing Willow Creek to division as a marital asset. It was a ruling that flew in the face of established trust law, and it made no legal sense, unless the judge had a personal interest in the outcome. That evening, I sat Robert down in James's study, surrounded by the legal books that had guided my husband's career, and laid out everything we'd discovered. "Mom," he said finally, his voice breaking, "what are we going to do?" "What your father would have done," I replied. "Fight for what's right, no matter how difficult." The next day, I called Diana Bailey, my oldest friend from college, who had become an investigative journalist for the Boston Globe. We met for lunch at a small restaurant in Cambridge, far from anyone who might recognize us. "This is quite a story, Margaret," Diana said after I'd shared our findings. "Judicial corruption isn't something I can publish without rock-solid evidence, but I can certainly help you gather more information." Diana's preliminary research confirmed our suspicions. Judge Bennett's financial disclosures showed several unexplained deposits over the past year, always just under $10,000, the threshold that would trigger automatic bank reporting. More concerning, she had ruled on 3 other divorce cases involving friends of Stephanie, all with outcomes that defied legal precedent. Meanwhile, I discreetly contacted several of James's former colleagues from the federal bench. I didn't share specifics, just asked hypothetical questions about judicial misconduct proceedings and evidence standards. The information I gathered was invaluable in shaping our approach. With Diana's help, we hired Thomas Reynolds, a private investigator with experience in judicial misconduct cases. He began documenting meetings between Stephanie and Judge Bennett outside of court. Lunches at exclusive restaurants, Meetings at Stephanie's home when Robert had the children, even a weekend trip to New York that coincided with another large withdrawal from Stephanie's account. The evidence was mounting, but I struggled with the consequences of what we were planning. Exposing Judge Bennett would destroy her career and reputation. Revealing Stephanie's role in the corruption would devastate Abigail and Thomas, who despite everything still loved their mother. I spent sleepless nights wondering if James would approve of the path I was taking, if I was crossing a line he would have respected. One evening, as I sat on the porch of Willow Creek, watching the sunset over the property James had loved so dearly, my sister Catherine came to visit. At 72, Catherine had always been my moral compass, the person I turned to in times of doubt. "You're worried about going too far," she observed as she sat beside me. "I'm worried about destroying lives," I admitted. "Stephanie is still my grandchildren's mother. Judge Bennett was once a respected jurist. Is protecting property worth all this?" Catherine took my hand. "This isn't about property, Maggie, and you know it. It's about justice. James spent his life upholding the law. What would he say about a judge who betrays that trust? About someone trying to manipulate the system he believed in?" She was right, of course. This wasn't just about Willow Creek or the Wilson legacy. It was about right and wrong in the most fundamental sense. With renewed determination, we moved forward with a two-pronged strategy. Michael would prepare both a formal motion for Judge Bennett to recuse herself due to conflict of interest and a sealed judicial misconduct complaint documenting the financial evidence. Meanwhile, Diana would prepare a story on judicial corruption in family courts, without naming names yet but establishing the groundwork for later revelations if necessary. I spent hours compiling and organizing evidence, creating a timeline of suspicious rulings correlated with meetings and financial transactions. Thomas Reynolds provided photographs, bank records, and witness statements. Michael translated it all into the precise legal language required for formal complaints. Robert, seeing the mountain of evidence, finally accepted the truth about both his ex-wife and the judge handling their case. "I can't believe I was so blind," he said one night as we reviewed documents in the study. "All those years, I never saw who she really was. Love makes us see what we want to see," I told him gently. "But now we need to see clearly." As our case against Judge Bennett and Stephanie solidified, we learned that Stephanie had begun quietly removing family heirlooms from Willow Creek, items specifically protected by the trust. Robert's scheduled visitation with the children was repeatedly canceled for flimsy reasons. The stakes were escalating, and we needed to act soon. I understand that some of you watching might be wondering if I took things too far. Trust me, I asked myself that same question every night. If you've ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your family, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Fighting corruption isn't easy, and sometimes the right path isn't clear until you're already walking it. Let me know if you're still with me on this journey by hitting that like button, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about standing up for what's right. Now, let me tell you what happened next, because this is where things really started to get complicated. 2 weeks before our plan was set to unfold, I decided to make one final attempt at reason. I invited Stephanie to dinner at Willow Creek under the pretense of discussing holiday arrangements for the children. Robert agreed to be present, hoping that a face-to-face conversation might break through the hostility that had characterized their interactions. I prepared James's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables and homemade bread. I set the dining room table with the Wilson family china, polished the silver that had been passed down for generations, and placed fresh flowers from the garden as a centerpiece. Perhaps reminding Stephanie of the family traditions she once claimed to value would spark some recognition of what she was destroying. She arrived precisely on time, dressed immaculately in a designer suit that likely cost more than most people's monthly salary. The first thing she did was glance around the room, her eyes cataloging items as if already calculating their value. "Thank you for coming," I said, gesturing toward her usual seat at the table. "I thought it would be good for us to talk, family to family." "I'm only here because you mentioned discussing the children's Christmas schedule," she replied coolly. "I have a dinner engagement later." Throughout the meal, I tried to steer the conversation toward conciliation. I reminded Stephanie of holidays spent at Willow Creek, of how much Abigail and Thomas loved the property, of the family history embedded in every corner of the estate. "That's exactly why it should be liquidated," Stephanie said, setting down her fork. "This place is worth millions that could be invested for the children's future." Instead, it sits here generating nothing but maintenance costs and property taxes. It generates a heritage, Robert countered, speaking up for the first time. A sense of belonging that money can't buy. Stephanie laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Heritage doesn't pay for college or buy opportunities. Your father understood that. He was a practical man. Don't talk about my husband as if you knew him better than I did, I said, my voice steady despite the anger rising inside me. James believed that Willow Creek belonged to all generations of Wilsons, past and future. That's why he created the trust. A trust that won't stand up in court, Stephanie responded with smug confidence. Judge Bennett understands the legal realities better than you do. I'm sure she does, I said carefully. You two have known each other for a long time, haven't you? Something flickered in Stephanie's eyes. A momentary wariness quickly replaced by composure. We were in college together, yes. But that has nothing to do with her rulings. Strange that she never disclosed that relationship to the court, Robert noted. Or the fact that she was your maid of honor. Ancient history, Stephanie dismissed. Judges aren't required to recuse themselves over college friendships from decades ago. What about current friendships? I asked. Weekly lunches? Weekend trips? Financial transactions? Stephanie's face hardened. I don't know what you're implying, but you should be careful. Judge Bennett doesn't take kindly to accusations against her integrity. No judge does, I agreed, especially when those accusations come with evidence. Before Stephanie could respond, there was a sound from the doorway. Abigail stood there, her young face pale with shock. None of us had heard her enter the house. She had used her key and come looking for her forgotten science textbook. Mom, she said, her voice small. What's going on? What are you doing with Judge Rosie? Stephanie's expression shifted instantly to maternal concern. Nothing, sweetheart. Grandma is just confused about some legal matters. I heard you, Abigail insisted, her voice growing stronger. You said the judge is helping you take away our house, the house Dad grew up in, the house I'm supposed to inherit someday. Abigail, you don't understand adult matters, Stephanie said sharply. This house is just property. I'm trying to secure your financial future. By bribing a judge? Abigail asked bluntly. At 14, she was already showing the keen intelligence and moral clarity that had characterized her grandfather. Stephanie stood abruptly. We're leaving. Get your things. No, Abigail said firmly. I'm staying with Dad this weekend. You agreed. Plans change, Stephanie snapped, grabbing Abigail's arm. Thomas is waiting in the car. We're going home. This is home too, Abigail protested, pulling away. And you're trying to take it away from us. The confrontation escalated quickly. Stephanie began making wild accusations about Robert and me turning the children against her. She threatened to revise the custody arrangement to supervised visitation only. When Robert tried to calm the situation, she turned on him with a viciousness that shocked even me. Your precious father would have seen reason, she hissed. James understood the value of money, even if you don't. Why do you think he became a federal judge instead of staying in private practice? For the prestige, the connections. He would have given me whatever I wanted just to keep things quiet and maintain his reputation. Robert's face went white with rage. Don't you dare speak about my father that way. He became a judge because he believed in justice. Something you clearly know nothing about. Thomas appeared in the doorway then, drawn by the raised voices. At 12, he was still so young to be witnessing such adult conflict. Is everyone fighting again? He asked, his voice small. I went to him, putting an arm around his shoulders. It's just a disagreement, sweetheart. About Willow Creek, he said, not a question but a statement. Mom says we're going to sell it and move to a better place. This is already the best place, I told him gently. And I promised your grandfather I would protect it for you and Abigail. Stephanie's face contorted with fury. Don't make promises you can't keep, Margaret. When I'm done, there won't be anything left of this place except the money in my bank account. She turned to the children. Get in the car, now. You're not taking them, Robert said firmly. This is my court-ordered weekend. Sue me, Stephanie sneered. Oh wait, you already tried that. How's it working out for you? As she herded the children toward the door, she turned back with a final threat. By the way, I've been cataloging the antiques. The Chippendale desk in the study should fetch at least $50,000. I think I'll start there when the judge gives me permission to collect my share. That desk belonged to James's grandfather, I said, horrified. It's specifically listed in the trust inventory. Not for long, Stephanie replied with a cold smile. I hope you enjoyed playing detective, Margaret. But if you pursue this vendetta against me and Rosalie, you'll never see your grandchildren again. I promise you that. With that, she was gone, taking Abigail and Thomas with her despite their protests and Robert's helpless anger. After the door slammed, Robert turned to me, his face a mask of determination I hadn't seen since James was alive. She's not getting away with this, Mom. Not any of it. No, I agreed quietly. She's not. The morning after our disastrous dinner with Stephanie, Robert called Brandon Harris to terminate his services. Instead, he officially retained Michael Preston as his new counsel. Michael immediately filed a notice of appearance with the court and requested an emergency hearing regarding the conflict of interest between Judge Bennett and Stephanie. We need to be strategic about this, Michael advised as we sat in his Boston office. If we go in guns blazing with corruption allegations, Bennett could dismiss them as desperate tactics and sanction us. We start with the straightforward conflict of interest. The fact that she was the maid of honor at their wedding and has maintained a close personal relationship with Stephanie. That alone should be enough for recusal. And if it's not? I asked. Then we have the sealed envelope ready with the financial evidence, Michael replied. But that's our nuclear option. Once we go there, there's no turning back. We spent the next week preparing meticulously. Michael drafted the motion for recusal, citing judicial ethics rules and precedents. I organized photographs documenting the long-term friendship between Stephanie and Judge Bennett. We prepared affidavits from witnesses who had seen them together at social functions during the pendency of the divorce case. Meanwhile, Diana Bailey continued her investigation, discovering that Judge Bennett had ruled on 5 other cases involving Stephanie's friends or clients of Eleanor Maxwell, all with outcomes favorable to Maxwell's clients. It established a pattern that went beyond our case. Robert faced his own challenges. Stephanie had filed an emergency motion alleging that he had emotionally abused the children during the confrontation at Willow Creek, seeking to suspend his visitation rights. It was a transparent attempt to isolate him from Abigail and Thomas, preventing them from learning more about what was happening. The day of our recusal hearing arrived with tension thick in the air. The courtroom was unusually full. Diana had quietly spread word in legal circles that something significant might happen in Judge Bennett's courtroom that morning. Several attorneys with no connection to our case sat in the gallery, along with a court reporter from the local newspaper. Judge Bennett entered, her usual confidence slightly diminished by the unexpected crowd. When she saw me sitting at the plaintiff's table beside Robert and Michael, her eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her composure. I see we have new counsel, she noted. Mr. Preston, welcome to my courtroom. Thank you, Your Honor, Michael replied smoothly. Before we proceed with today's scheduled matters, I have an emergency motion to present. Proceed, Judge Bennett said, her tone carefully neutral. Michael stood. Your Honor, we respectfully move that you recuse yourself from this case due to a significant conflict of interest. Evidence has come to light of a long-standing personal relationship between Your Honor and Mrs. Stephanie Wilson that creates, at minimum, an appearance of impropriety. Eleanor Maxwell was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, this is outrageous. A desperate tactic by the respondent who is unhappy with the course of these proceedings. I haven't ruled yet, Counselor, Judge Bennett said sharply. Mr. Preston, what evidence do you have of this alleged conflict? Michael approached the bench with a folder. Your Honor, these photographs document your role as maid of honor in Mrs. Wilson's wedding. Additionally, we have affidavits from witnesses who have observed continued social contact between yourself and Mrs. Wilson throughout these proceedings, including meetings at the Oak Ridge Country Club as recently as last week. Judge Bennett glanced at the photographs, her face paling slightly. A college friendship and occasional social contact hardly constitutes a conflict requiring recusal, Mr. Preston. With respect, Your Honor, Michael continued, the Judicial Code of Conduct is clear that any relationship that might reasonably call into question the judge's impartiality requires disclosure at minimum and recusal where appropriate. This relationship was never disclosed to the court or to my client. Because it's irrelevant, Eleanor interjected. Judge Bennett's rulings have been based on the facts and the law, nothing more. If I may continue, Your Honor, Michael said firmly. We also have evidence of financial irregularities that coincide with Your Honor's rulings in this case. The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Bennett's knuckles whitened around her gavel. That is a very serious allegation, Mr. Preston, one that borders on contempt of court. It is serious, Your Honor, Michael agreed. Which is why we've prepared a sealed complaint for the Judicial Conduct Committee, containing bank records, property transactions, and other evidence that we're prepared to submit today, if necessary. Eleanor was conferring frantically with Stephanie, whose smug confidence had given way to visible anxiety. Judge Bennett called a 15-minute recess, nearly running from the courtroom. During the break, we observed Judge Bennett and Eleanor Maxwell having an intense conversation in a side corridor. Our private investigator, positioned discreetly in the courthouse, photographed the exchange. Stephanie paced near the water fountain, repeatedly checking her phone. When court resumed, Judge Bennett's demeanor had changed completely. The cool confidence was gone, replaced by a brittle formality. In the interest of avoiding any appearance of impropriety, she announced, "I am recusing myself from this case. The clerk will reassign it to another judge. This court is adjourned." As she hurried from the bench, her eyes met mine briefly. In that moment, I saw recognition, fear, and something else, respect. She knew she had been outmaneuvered by someone she had underestimated. Outside the courtroom, Stephanie confronted us, her voice low and furious. "You have no idea what you've done. This changes nothing. I still have custody of the children, and you'll never see them again." "Actually," Michael interjected, "we've filed an emergency motion for temporary custody modification based on evidence of your attempts to alienate the children from their father. Judge Thompson will hear it tomorrow morning." "Judge who?" Stephanie demanded. "Harold Thompson," Michael replied. "The senior family court judge who has taken over the case. He has a reputation for being particularly concerned with parental alienation issues." For the first time since this ordeal began, I saw real fear in Stephanie's eyes. Her carefully constructed plan was unraveling, and she knew it. Diana Bailey approached us as we left the courthouse. "Well done," she said quietly. "The Judicial Committee has already contacted me about my investigation. They're opening a formal inquiry." "What happens now?" Robert asked. "Now," Michael said, "we start fighting back on equal footing." The morning of the hearing before Judge Thompson, I dressed with particular care. I chose a conservative navy blue suit that James had always said made me look both dignified and approachable. I wore pearl earrings he had given me on our 30th anniversary, and most importantly, I put on his wedding ring on a chain around my neck. I needed his strength today. Robert arrived at Willow Creek early to drive us to the courthouse together. The past week had aged him, but there was a new resolve in his bearing. Michael met us at the courthouse steps, carrying a leather briefcase containing all our evidence. "Judge Thompson has a reputation for being thorough and fair," Michael told us as we walked toward the courtroom. "He's been on the bench for 30 years and doesn't tolerate games. We have a real chance here." The courtroom was already packed when we arrived. Diana Bailey sat in the back row, notebook in hand. Several attorneys from other firms had come to observe what was quickly becoming the most talked-about case in the district. Eleanor Maxwell was at the plaintiff's table, arranging papers with sharp, angry movements. Stephanie had not yet arrived. When she did enter, the change in her demeanor was striking. Gone was the designer suit and confident stride. Instead, she wore a modest dress and minimal makeup, clearly attempting to project an image of a simple mother concerned only for her children's welfare. The most surprising presence, however, was near the back of the gallery. Judge Rosalie Bennett, not in her judicial robes but in civilian clothes, looking tense and uncomfortable. She had not been subpoenaed and had no obligation to attend. Her presence suggested she knew exactly what was about to happen and wanted to witness it firsthand. We took our seats at the defense table, and I noticed Robert's surprise when he saw me place my legal pad in front of me rather than sitting in the gallery. "Mom?" I questioned quietly. "I'll be joining the table today," I told him. "Michael has filed a motion for me to be recognized as an interested party due to my role as trustee." Before he could respond, the bailiff called out, "All rise," the Honorable Judge Harold Thompson presiding. Judge Thompson was in his 70s, with a full head of white hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He nodded to the court and took his seat, reviewing the file in front of him for several long moments, while the room remained utterly silent. This case has been reassigned to me following Judge Bennett's recusal, he finally said, looking up over his reading glasses. I've reviewed the file, and, frankly, I have some concerns about the proceedings thus far. Before we continue, I note that we have an additional party at the defense table. Yes, Your Honor, Michael responded. Margaret Wilson, mother of the defendant and trustee of the Wilson Family Trust, which has been drawn into these proceedings. We filed a motion for her to be recognized as an interested party with standing. Judge Thompson nodded. Miss Maxwell, any objection? Eleanor Maxwell rose. Your Honor, Mrs. Wilson has no standing in a divorce proceeding between my client and her husband. She does when your client has attempted to invalidate a family trust of which Mrs. Wilson is the legally appointed trustee, Judge Thompson replied dryly. Motion granted. Mrs. Wilson is recognized as an interested party. He then turned directly to me. Mrs. Wilson, why are you here today? The question echoed Judge Bennett's shocked query from weeks before, but with an entirely different tone, not dismissive, but genuinely interested in my answer. I stood slowly, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I'm here to protect my family from corruption, Your Honor. Not just the property held in trust, but the integrity of the legal process that my husband devoted his life to upholding. Judge Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. Strong words, Mrs. Wilson. I understand you're the widow of federal Judge James Wilson? I am, Your Honor. I knew James, Judge Thompson said, surprising me. We sat on a judicial panel together years ago. He was a man of uncommon integrity. Please, continue. Michael stood. Your Honor, we'd like to enter into evidence documentation showing a pattern of judicial misconduct by Judge Bennett in connection with this case, including improper communications with the plaintiff and what appear to be financial incentives influencing her rulings. Objection, Eleanor nearly shouted. This is outrageous and defamatory. It would be, Michael agreed calmly, if it weren't true and meticulously documented. Judge Thompson studied both attorneys for a long moment. This is an extraordinary allegation, Mr. Preston. Are you prepared to substantiate it fully? Yes, Your Honor. We have photographs, financial records, witness statements, and text messages demonstrating inappropriate coordination between Judge Bennett and Miss Stephanie Wilson. Eleanor was conferring frantically with Stephanie, whose carefully constructed maternal image was crumbling as her face flushed with anger. Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to distract from the substantive issues of the divorce. Even if there was a friendship between my client and Judge Bennett, which we don't concede influenced any rulings, it's irrelevant now that Judge Bennett has recused herself. I disagree, Judge Thompson replied. If there was misconduct that influenced prior rulings in this case, those rulings may need to be vacated. Mr. Preston, please present your evidence. Michael called me to the witness stand first. As I was sworn in, I could feel the weight of every eye in the courtroom, but I focused only on the photograph of James I carried in my wallet, placed now on the rail before me. For the next hour, I methodically laid out the evidence we had gathered. The long-standing relationship between Stephanie and Judge Bennett, the pattern of rulings that defied legal precedent, the suspicious financial transactions. Michael presented the photographs our investigator had taken, the bank records showing large cash withdrawals and deposits, the text messages recovered from Abigail's iPad. The gallery responded with gasps as particularly damning evidence was presented. Judge Bennett, still seated in the back, grew increasingly pale but remained, perhaps knowing that leaving would only confirm her guilt. Eleanor's objections grew more desperate as our presentation continued. Judge Thompson overruled most of them, his expression growing darker with each new piece of evidence. Your Honor, Eleanor finally said, even if there were improprieties in the prior proceedings, which we absolutely deny, the solution is simply to continue with a new judge. You. Not to make these slanderous accusations part of the record. Miss Maxwell, Judge Thompson replied sternly, if half of what has been presented is accurate, we're no longer discussing mere improprieties, but potential criminal conduct. I cannot in good conscience ignore such evidence. At that moment, the courtroom door opened, and a man in a suit entered, walking directly to the bench and handing Judge Thompson a document. He read it quickly, then looked up. It seems the Judicial Conduct Committee has taken an interest in our proceedings today, he announced. They've appointed a special master to observe and collect evidence for their own investigation. Mr. James Williams, please make your presence known. A distinguished older man stood from the gallery. "Present, Your Honor. The committee has received a sealed complaint and has opened a formal investigation into Judge Bennett's conduct." All eyes turned to Judge Bennett, who now sat rigid in her seat, her legal career effectively over. Stephanie, realizing her position was crumbling, leaned over to whisper urgently to Eleanor, who shook her head in response. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, rising again, "my client requests a recess to consider her position." "Granted," Judge Thompson replied. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour." As court officers cleared the room, I caught Stephanie's eye across the aisle. For a moment, the mask of righteous indignation fell completely, and I saw raw hatred in her expression. But beneath that was something else. Defeat. She knew she had lost. Judge Thompson reconvened court precisely 1 hour later. The gallery had swelled even further, with several reporters now present. James Williams, the special master from the Judicial Conduct Committee, sat in the front row taking detailed notes. Eleanor Maxwell rose immediately. "Your Honor, in light of recent developments, my client wishes to withdraw her claim against the Wilson Family Trust and seeks an adjournment to prepare a revised settlement proposal." It was a stunning reversal, but Judge Thompson merely nodded. "Miss Wilson, do you accept this withdrawal?" Stefania stood, her composure barely intact. "Yes, Your Honor." "Very well," Judge Thompson continued. "Now, regarding the evidence presented today concerning Judge Bennett's conduct, Mr. Williams, what is the committee's position?" The special master stood. "Your Honor, based on the evidence presented and our preliminary investigation, the committee has voted to suspend Judge Bennett pending a full inquiry. We are also referring the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation." Judge Bennett, still seated in the gallery, closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she rose and walked out of the courtroom without a word, her career and reputation in tatters. "This court will take a similar approach," Judge Thompson announced. "All prior rulings by Judge Bennett in this case are hereby vacated. We will start these proceedings fresh with full financial disclosure from both parties and a thorough review of the Wilson Family Trust documents. Additionally, I am referring Miss Stephanie Wilson to the district attorney for investigation into possible bribery of a judicial officer." Stephanie's face went white. Eleanor immediately requested permission to withdraw as counsel, clearly recognizing that she might be implicated in the widening scandal. The aftermath of that dramatic day unfolded rapidly. By evening, Diana Bailey's story had hit the Boston Globe's website with the headline, "Judicial Misconduct Scandal Rocks Family Court." Judge Bennett submitted her resignation from the bench the following morning. The district attorney's office opened formal investigations into both Bennett and Stephanie. For Robert, the vindication was bittersweet. He embraced me outside the courthouse, tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry I ever doubted you, Mom. I should have seen what was happening. You loved her," I said simply. "Love can blind us to hard truths." The hardest part was explaining to Abigail and Thomas what had happened. Robert and I sat them down at Willow Creek the following weekend, speaking carefully and avoiding disparaging their mother while still being truthful. "So, Mom tried to take away our house by bribing Judge Rosie?" Thomas asked, his 12-year-old mind cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "She made some very poor choices," I said gently. "But she's still your mother, and she loves you." "Does she?" Abigail asked, her young face too serious for her 14 years. "If she loved us, would she have tried to take away our family home? Would she have lied to us about Dad?" I had no easy answer for that. People can love and still make terrible mistakes, sweetheart. The important thing is that Willow Creek is safe now. It will be here for you and Thomas, just as your grandfather wanted. The weeks that followed brought significant changes. Judge Thompson appointed a guardian ad litem to represent the children's interests and ordered a thorough custody evaluation. Based on the evidence of Stephanie's attempts to alienate the children from Robert, he granted Robert temporary primary custody, with Stephanie receiving supervised visitation until the evaluation was complete. The Wilson Family Trust was validated, with Willow Creek conclusively removed from the divorce proceedings. Stephanie's attorney filed a request for a plea agreement with the district attorney, suggesting she was prepared to provide evidence against Judge Bennett in exchange for leniency. Diana's investigation continued, uncovering at least 7 other cases where Judge Bennett had issued suspicious rulings favoring friends or associates. The scandal expanded beyond our family drama, raising serious questions about oversight in the family court system. Robert and I began the slow process of healing, both for ourselves and for Abigail and Thomas. We restored family routines at Willow Creek, resumed Sunday dinners in the formal dining room, and spent weekends walking the property and sharing stories about its history. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Thomas chase fireflies across the lawn, Robert turned to me. "Dad would be proud of you, Mom. You fought for justice just like he always did." I thought of James then, of his unwavering commitment to doing what was right regardless of the cost. "I just did what he would have expected," I said. "What any of us should do when faced with corruption." Stephanie eventually moved to Arizona, accepting a significantly reduced settlement that included no claim on Willow Creek or any other trust assets. Her criminal case was resolved with a plea to a lesser charge, resulting in probation and community service rather than jail time. An outcome I supported for the sake of Abigail and Thomas. Judge Bennett was not so fortunate. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and she eventually pleaded guilty to multiple counts of judicial misconduct and accepting bribes. The woman who had once wielded such power from the bench was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, her legal career and reputation destroyed forever. As the summer ended and fall began to touch the trees at Willow Creek with gold and crimson, I found myself reflecting on the cost of our victory. Justice had been served, but families had been broken, careers destroyed, children traumatized. I wondered sometimes if there could have been another way, a path with less collateral damage. But when I watched Abigail and Thomas running through the gardens their ancestors had planted, secure in the knowledge that this place would remain their sanctuary, I knew we had done what was necessary. Some principles are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. 1 year later, we gathered at Willow Creek for Thanksgiving dinner. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the table set with the Wilson family china and silver that had graced holiday celebrations for generations. Through the windows, the first snow of the season dusted the grounds with white, transforming the property into a winter wonderland that had delighted Wilson children for over a century. Robert carved the turkey at the head of the table, a position James had occupied for decades before him. At 15, Abigail had blossomed into a confident young woman with her grandfather's keen intellect and sense of justice. Thomas, now 13, had discovered a passion for photography, documenting every corner of Willow Creek for what he called his family history project. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, with terms that reflected the truth rather than Stephanie's manipulated narrative. Robert received primary custody, with Stephanie granted regular visitation now that she had completed court-ordered therapy for parental alienation issues. The Wilson family trust remained intact, with Willow Creek secured for future generations. Stephanie had chosen to remain in Arizona, starting a new life away from the scandal that had consumed her in Massachusetts. She called the children weekly and visited every other month, a relationship that remained strained but was slowly healing with time and distance. Judge Bennett was serving her sentence in a minimum security federal prison, her legal career permanently ended. The judicial misconduct investigation had widened to include 2 other judges in the district, leading to significant reforms in judicial oversight and ethics enforcement. Diana Bailey's reporting on the case had earned her a Pulitzer nomination and sparked a statewide review of family court procedures. Michael Preston had been appointed to a commission tasked with recommending reforms to prevent similar corruption in the future. As for me, I had found an unexpected purpose in the aftermath of our ordeal. Several women facing similar situations in family court had reached out after Diana's articles were published, seeking advice and support. I began volunteering with a legal aid organization, helping others navigate complex court processes and recognize signs of potential misconduct. After dinner, as Robert and the children cleared the table, a Wilson family tradition that everyone participates in cleanup, I slipped away to the study. James's presence still lingered here among his books and papers. I often came to this room when I needed to feel close to him. On his desk, I noticed Thomas had left one of his photographs, a black and white image of the judge's gavel that had been displayed at our wedding, a gift from James's mentor when he was appointed to the federal bench. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it made me smile. As I picked up the photograph, I noticed a leather-bound journal beneath it that I didn't recognize. Opening it, I was startled to see James's handwriting, dated just months before his death. It was an entry about Stephanie. I worry about Robert's marriage. Stephanie asked again today about changing the trust to give them direct control of Willow Creek. When I explained why the property must remain in trust for future generations, I saw something in her eyes I didn't like. Calculation, resentment. I hope I'm wrong, but I fear she may someday become a threat to everything we've built. If that day comes, Margaret will know what to do. She always does. Tears filled my eyes as I closed the journal. James had seen the truth about Stephanie long before any of us had been willing to acknowledge it. He had trusted me to protect what mattered when the time came. Robert found me there, still holding the journal. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly. "I am," I replied, showing him the entry. "Your father knew. He saw it coming." Robert read the words, then looked up with a sad smile. He always was a good judge of character, in every sense of the word. We rejoined Abigail and Thomas in the living room, where they had started a fire in the hearth and were sorting through old photo albums. As I settled into James's favorite armchair, I felt a deep sense of peace. Willow Creek would continue, the Wilson legacy intact for another generation and beyond. The legal battle had cost us all dearly in different ways. Stephanie had lost her reputation and damaged her relationship with her children. Judge Bennett had lost her career and freedom. Our family had endured public scrutiny and painful revelations. Yet justice had prevailed, not just for our family, but for all those who might have faced Judge Bennett's corrupted court in the future. Sometimes, fighting for what's right comes at a high price, but the alternative, allowing injustice to stand unchallenged, costs even more. As I watched my son and grandchildren laughing together in the warm glow of the fire, I knew that James would be proud of the stand we had taken. Not because we had won, but because we had refused to surrender to corruption, even when the easier path would have been to give in. That evening, as snow continued to fall softly outside, I went to James's grave in the small family cemetery on the property. I brushed the snow from his headstone and placed a single rose against the cold marble. "We did it," I whispered. "We protected everything that matters, not just Willow Creek, but what it represents: integrity, justice, family. Your legacy lives on, my love. I've learned that family isn't just about blood or property or inheritance. It's about standing together for what's right, about keeping promises across generations, about protecting not just material legacies, but moral ones as well. If there's one thing I hope my grandchildren take from this difficult chapter in our family history, it's that integrity is worth fighting for, no matter the cost. I'd love to know if any of you have had to take a stand to protect your family legacy, whether it's property, traditions, or values. Has there been a time when you've had to fight against corruption or injustice in your own life? Your stories matter, and I'd be honored if you'd share them in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories about family, justice, and standing up for what's right. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember, sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought quietly, with determination and unwavering principle, for the sake of those we love.